Jake Morrison stood in the grand hall of the Veltar Royal Palace and watched the alien priests prepare for his wedding ceremony. The massive chamber stretched upward into shadows that seemed to go on forever. Golden light filtered through crystal, windows that showed the twin suns of Veltara Prime hanging in a purple sky. Hundreds of alien dignitaries filled the hall, and their scales and fur and strange limbs created a sea of colors that hurt his human eyes. He adjusted his formal Earth uniform one more time and tried to look calm. The blue fabric felt strange, against his skin after months of wearing Veltar robes during the courtship period. His bride had insisted he wear something from his homeworld for the ceremony. Queen Zarathiel wanted their union to represent both their peoples coming together. The queen herself approached from the far end of the hall. Her reptilian features caught the golden light and made her look like something from an ancient Earth legend. Her scales shifted from deep green to silver as she moved, and her amber eyes fixed on Jake with what he had learned to recognize as affection among her people. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, and her presence commanded respect from every creature in the room. Jake smiled and felt genuine warmth toward this alien woman who would become his wife. Over the past year of negotiations and courtship, he had grown to care for her deeply. She was intelligent and strong, and possessed a sense of humor that translated well across species barriers. She also believed he was a simple military officer turned diplomat who represented a weak and primitive human civilization. The Veltar High Priest began speaking in the ancient ritual language. Jake had memorized his responses during weeks of preparation. The words felt heavy on his tongue, and he knew that billions of beings across the galaxy would watch recordings of this ceremony. Most would see it as a powerful alien queen taking pity on a backward species by accepting one of their males as a husband. Ambassador Chen from the Altrian Republic whispered something to his aide about humans being lucky to find such generous protectors. The Korthak trade delegate nodded agreement and added that Earth would benefit greatly from Veltar military protection. Jake kept his expression humble and grateful as he had practiced. Queen Zarathiel spoke her vows in perfect English as a gesture of respect to Jake's people. Her words promised to guard and guide humanity through the dangerous galaxy that surrounded their small group of colonies. She vowed to use Veltar's strength to shield Earth from threats that humans could never handle alone. Jake responded with his own vows, promising loyalty and gratitude for her people's protection. The ceremony continued with ritual exchanges of gifts between their species. Jake presented a simple wooden carving made by Earth artisans that depicted humans and Veltar working together. The alien guests murmured appreciation for the primitive but charming artwork. Zarathiel gave Jake a crystal that contained the recorded history of her empire spanning thousands of years. She explained that she wanted him to understand the legacy he was joining. During the feast that followed, Jake sat beside his new wife and listened to conversations in dozens of alien languages. The universal translator in his ear fed him a steady stream of commentary about the wedding. Most guests spoke freely about humans as if Jake could not understand them. The Nexari ambassador told his companion that humans reminded him of pets his people kept on their home world. The Veltar General Krexnor laughed and said that at least these pets could talk back. Several other military officers debated whether humans possessed any useful warrior traits or if they were purely a civilian species suited only for farming and manufacturing. Jake nodded politely when addressed and answered questions about Earth with the humble enthusiasm expected of him. He described human technology as crude, but improving thanks to Veltar guidance. He spoke of human military forces as brave but hopelessly outmatched by galactic standards. He praised Veltar wisdom in offering protection to such a vulnerable species. Zarathiel beamed with pride at her new husband's reasonable attitude. She had worried that human males might possess the dangerous arrogance that plagued many species when they first encountered galactic civilization. Jake's willingness to acknowledge human limitations impressed her and reinforced her decision to marry him. Later that evening, Jake and Zarathiel stood alone on a balcony overlooking the capital city. Towers of living crystal grew from the ground and pulsed with soft light. Veltar citizens moved through aerial walkways that connected the structures like veins in some vast organism. The sight was beautiful and alien, and completely beyond anything humans could create according to every expert who had examined Veltar technology. Zarathiel placed a scaled hand on Jake's shoulder and told him how proud she was to have him as her husband. She said that humans were fortunate to have produced someone with his wisdom and adaptability. She promised that their marriage would bring great benefits to both their peoples and especially to fragile humanity. Jake thanked her and said he felt honored to join such an advanced civilization. He admitted that humans had much to learn from the Veltar and other galactic species. He expressed hope that Earth's children would grow up safer because of the protection her empire offered. They talked about their plans for the future, and Zarathiel outlined how human colonies could be better defended under Veltar oversight. She suggested relocating some of Earth's outer settlements to systems where Veltar fleets could respond quickly to threats. She spoke of human soldiers training alongside Veltar warriors to learn proper combat techniques. Jake agreed enthusiastically with all her suggestions, while a small part of his mind calculated exactly how such arrangements would give the Veltar complete control over human space. He pushed that thought aside and focused on his wife's genuine desire to help his people survive in a hostile galaxy. Near midnight, a communication device chimed softly in Jake's quarters. Zarathiel was meeting with her advisors about trade agreements, so Jake was alone when he activated the encrypted channel. The message appeared as text only with no audio or video that might be detected by Veltar monitoring systems. The words were brief, but they changed everything. 3 simple sentences that made Jake's expression shift from humble gratitude to something cold and calculating. He deleted the message immediately and returned to his balcony where the beautiful alien city continued its nighttime display. Jake Morrison looked up at the stars and wondered how long it would be before the galaxy learned what humans were truly capable of. He wondered if his new wife would ever forgive him for the deception that was about to end. Most of all, he wondered if the coming storm would leave their marriage intact when the truth finally emerged. For now, he would continue playing the role of grateful human diplomat. He would smile and nod and accept Veltar protection, while Earth made its final preparations. Soon enough, the galaxy would understand that humanity needed no one's protection, and that underestimating humans was a mistake that entire civilizations would regret. 6 months passed after the wedding, and Jake Morrison had settled into life as the Queen's human husband. He spent his days learning about Veltar culture and attending diplomatic meetings where other species representatives treated him with polite condescension. Everyone assumed he was harmless, and most conversations continued as if he was not present. Queen Zarathiel had grown more comfortable with their relationship and often spoke openly about galactic politics around Jake. She explained complex military strategies and trade negotiations with the patience of someone teaching a child. Jake listened carefully and asked simple questions that made him appear curious, but not threatening. The comfortable routine ended when urgent reports reached the palace about Kethmori ship movements near the galactic rim. The insectoid species had been expanding aggressively for years, but always away from established civilizations. Intelligence suggested they were finally ready to move against settled space. Zarathiel called an emergency council meeting and invited Jake to observe. The war room filled with Veltar military commanders and their holographic displays showed fleet positions across 3 star systems. General Krexnor dominated the discussion with his booming voice and aggressive posture. The general pointed to red markers that represented Kethmori forces and explained their movement patterns. The insectoids traveled in massive swarms that overwhelmed individual worlds through sheer numbers. Their technology adapted quickly to enemy weapons, making conventional defensive strategies ineffective. Admiral Vexta added her analysis of recent engagements between Kethmori scouts and border patrol units. The aliens fought with coordination that suggested hive mind control, and their ships showed capabilities that matched or exceeded Veltar standards. Several patrol squadrons had vanished without sending distress signals. Jake sat quietly in his observer chair and absorbed every detail while maintaining an expression of confused concern. When the discussion turned to human space, he leaned forward with apparent worry about his people's safety. General Krexnor dismissed human defenses as worthless against Kethmori swarms. He stated that human military forces lacked both the technology and the warrior spirit needed for such a conflict. The best strategy would be immediate evacuation of human colonies to Veltar-protected systems. Several other commanders agreed and began discussing logistics for relocating human populations. They spoke of Earth's colonies as if they were livestock, being moved to safety rather than independent settlements with their own defensive capabilities. Zarathiel looked at Jake with sympathy and explained that his people would be much safer under direct Veltar protection. She assured him that humans would be treated well and allowed to maintain their cultural identity within the Empire. The relocation would be temporary until the Keth Mori threat was eliminated. Jake thanked the Council for their concern about human welfare. He requested permission to contact Earth's government about coordinating the evacuation efforts. He explained that human civilians would cooperate better if their own leaders helped organize the movement. The Queen granted his request and praised his realistic assessment of the situation. She told the Council that Jake understood human limitations and would not let pride endanger innocent lives. Several officers nodded approval at the human's wisdom. Over the following days, Jake began making encrypted communications with Earth, while Veltar forces prepared for war. His messages appeared to be evacuation requests, but contained coded information about Keth Mori capabilities and Veltar military plans. The Keth Mori advance accelerated, and their scout fleets probed deeper into settled space. They hit isolated outposts and mining stations with overwhelming force, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Each attack revealed new tactical adaptations that countered the defenders' weapons. Jake started asking technical questions about Veltar military systems under the guise of understanding how they would protect human refugees. He inquired about fleet composition and supply lines and defensive strategies with the innocent curiosity of someone trying to comprehend forces beyond his experience. Admiral Vexta found his questions endearing and spent hours explaining Veltar military doctrine to the eager human. She described their ship classes and weapon systems and tactical formations, while Jake absorbed every detail behind his grateful smile. The first major attack came without warning when Keth Mori forces struck the border world of Velkos. The Kai planet's orbital defenses lasted less than an hour against the swarming alien ships. Ground forces held out for 2 days before being overwhelmed by insectoid warriors that moved like living tsunamis across the surface. Emergency reports reached the capital and showed the true scale of the threat facing the Empire. Keth Mori numbers exceeded all intelligence estimates, and their coordination was perfect. They seemed to anticipate every defensive move and adapted their tactics faster than the Veltar could respond. Zarathiel convened another emergency session, and the mood in the war room was grim. General Krexnor admitted that conventional strategies would not work against this enemy. The Keth Mori fought like a single organism with millions of parts working in perfect harmony. During the briefing, a communication arrived reporting that a human colony transport had vanished near the border zone. The ship carried 15,000 civilians fleeing from settlements near Keth Mori advance routes. All attempts to contact the vessel had failed. Jake's reaction to the news was controlled grief mixed with quiet anger. He thanked the officers for the information and asked if search and rescue operations were possible. When told that the area was too dangerous, he accepted the answer with resignation that impressed the Veltar. Zarathiel personally consoled her husband and promised that the Veltar would avenge the lost humans. She assured him that his people's sacrifice would not be forgotten and that the Empire would make the Keth Mori pay for their crimes. Jake responded with gratitude for her compassion, while something cold and dangerous flickered in his eyes. He told her that he hoped the Keth Mori would learn that attacking innocent people was a mistake. The words carried weight that made Zarathiel pause, but she attributed his intensity to grief. The crisis deepened when Keth Mori forces launched coordinated attacks against 3 Veltar border systems simultaneously. The Empire's fleet was spread thin, trying to defend multiple targets while the enemy concentrated overwhelming force at each point. Battle reports showed Veltar ships being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. The insectoids adaptive. Technology made their weapons increasingly effective, while Veltar systems became less useful with each engagement. Traditional military doctrine was proving useless against an enemy that evolved during combat. Jake continued his communications with Earth while appearing to coordinate refugee efforts. He submitted reports about safe evacuation routes and requested updates on human-civilian movements. The Veltar monitoring his transmissions saw exactly what they expected from a concerned human diplomat. The breaking point came when Kethmori forces penetrated deep enough into Veltar space to threaten core, industrial worlds. The Empire faced the possibility of losing systems that had been secure for thousands of years. Panic began spreading through the government as officials realized their military might was insufficient. In private moments with his wife, Jake showed increasing signs of controlled fury beneath his diplomatic facade. When Zarathiel mentioned additional human losses to Kethmori raids, he responded with words that chilled her blood. He told her that the insects were making a serious mistake by targeting human settlements. He said that some actions could not be forgiven or forgotten, no matter how small and weak the victims appeared. His tone carried implications that she could not quite understand, but that made her scales bristle with instinctive alarm. Jake requested immediate transport to Earth to help coordinate the final evacuation phases. He explained that his presence might help calm human civilians who were frightened by the approaching war. Zarathiel agreed to accompany him personally to show Veltar commitment to protecting humanity. As their ship prepared for departure, Jake received another encrypted message that made his expression shift from diplomatic concern to something altogether more dangerous. He deleted the communication quickly, but not before Zarathiel noticed the change in his posture. She began to suspect that her husband was hiding something significant about himself or his people. The thought troubled her because she had grown to trust Jake completely over their months together. The possibility that he was concealing important information created doubt where none had existed before. Their ship entered hyperspace, bound for Earth, and Jake Morrison sat quietly beside his alien wife while she dozed in her cabin. He looked out at the streaking stars and thought about the message he had just received. 3 more words that would change everything once they reached human space. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had been preparing for this war longer than anyone imagined. The Veltar Royal Transport dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, and Zarathiel expected to find chaos. She had seen the evacuation reports and knew that human space was supposed to be in complete disorder with civilian ships fleeing toward Veltar protection. Instead, she found herself looking at the largest military fleet she had ever seen outside of Imperial core worlds. Hundreds of human ships hung in perfect formation around Earth's orbital defense platforms. The vessels were sleek and heavily armed and moved with precision that made Veltar formations look clumsy by comparison. Jake Morrison stood beside her on the observation deck and watched his wife's confusion with carefully hidden satisfaction. He had maintained his humble diplomat act for so long that seeing her reaction to human military power felt like removing a weight from his shoulders. Admiral Lisa Carter's voice came through the communication system and requested permission to come aboard. Zarathiel granted it automatically while still staring at the impossible sight outside. Human technology was supposed to be primitive compared to Veltar standards, but these ships looked more advanced than anything in her empire. Carter materialized in their transport bay and saluted Jake with the respect due to a superior officer. She addressed him as Admiral Morrison and asked for updated intelligence about Kethmori capabilities. Zarathiel felt the ground shift beneath her feet as she realized her husband was not the simple diplomat he had claimed to be. Jake's entire posture changed as he dropped his humble facade and became the military commander he had always been. He spoke with authority about strategic positions and fleet movements while Carter listened and took notes. The conversation revealed that humans had been tracking Kethmori expansion for years and preparing countermeasures. Zarathiel interrupted to demand explanations about what she was seeing and hearing. Jake turned to face his wife and for the first time since their wedding showed her his true self. The grateful human diplomat vanished, and in his place stood someone who commanded respect through competence rather than gratitude. He explained that humanity had been concealing their true capabilities from galactic civilization for decades. They had deliberately presented themselves as weak and primitive while secretly developing military technology that surpassed most known species. The helpless colonists that needed Veltar protection were actually the forward elements of one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces. The revelation struck Zarathiel like a physical blow, and she struggled to process what her husband was telling her. Every conversation they had shared about human weakness and Veltar protection had been based on lies. Jake had been humoring her while representing a civilization that could probably conquer her empire if they chose to do so. Admiral, Carter provided additional details that made the deception even more complete. Human colonies that appeared defenseless were actually military bases with hidden weapons and reinforcements. The primitive technology that aliens had observed was deliberate misdirection, while real human capabilities remained classified. Jake admitted that he genuinely cared for Zarathiel, but that his primary duty was to protect humanity from galactic threats. The marriage had been part of an intelligence-gathering operation designed to learn about Veltar military capabilities and political structures. Every question he had asked about fleet compositions and strategic doctrine had been professional reconnaissance. The personal betrayal hurt worse than the political implications, and Zarathiel felt her trust in Jake crumble completely. She had shared her empire's most sensitive information with someone she believed was a harmless human diplomat. Instead, she had been providing classified military intelligence to a potential enemy. Carter interrupted the personal drama to brief Jake about current tactical situations. The Keth Mori had accelerated their advance and were moving toward human space in force. Intelligence suggested they viewed human colonies as easy targets that would provide resources for their next phase of expansion. Jake's expression became coldly professional as he reviewed battle reports and fleet dispositions. He approved deployment, orders that would position human forces where they could intercept Keth Mori advance elements. The transformation from humble diplomat to military commander was so complete that Zarathiel wondered if she had ever known her husband at all. Strategic briefing revealed that humanity had been preparing for exactly this scenario for years. They had identified the Keth Mori as a potential threat and developed specific countermeasures for insectoid swarm tactics. Human commanders had wargamed dozens of engagement scenarios and created detailed response plans. Zarathiel listened to discussions about human military capabilities and realized that her people had been living next to a military power that could reshape the galactic balance overnight. The species she had considered primitive clients were actually sophisticated strategists who had been manipulating galactic politics while building an unstoppable war machine. Jake offered to include Veltar forces in the human response to Keth Mori. Aggression, but made it clear that humanity would lead the operation. He suggested that Zarathiel could observe human military doctrine firsthand and evaluate whether the Veltar wanted to continue their previous relationship or negotiate a new partnership between equals. The Queen struggled with rage and betrayal, while recognizing that her empire desperately needed allies against the Keth Mori threat. Human deception had wounded her personally, but their military capability offered hope for defeating an enemy that had crushed Veltar forces in every engagement. Admiral Carter provided technical briefings about human weapon systems and tactical doctrines that made Veltar military technology look obsolete. Human ships used adaptive shielding and modular weapon systems that could be reconfigured during battle. Their commanders trained for complex multidimensional warfare that treated space combat like chess played across star systems. Jake explained that human soldiers were selected and trained according to standards that would impress even Veltar warriors. They combined physical conditioning with tactical flexibility and psychological resilience that made them effective against any enemy type. Human military doctrine emphasized adaptability and innovation over rigid adherence to traditional strategies. The demonstration of human capabilities continued as the fleet moved toward intercept positions for the approaching Keth Mori forces. Ships that had appeared to be simple escorts revealed themselves as heavily armed cruisers with firepower that exceeded Veltar battleships. Formations that looked random reorganized into complex tactical patterns with mathematical precision. Zarathiel found herself torn between admiration for human achievement and fury over their deception. The species she had patronized as primitive had been playing a game several levels above anything she understood. Every gesture of Veltar protection had been accepted by people who were secretly more powerful than her entire empire. The personal cost of learning the truth weighed heavily on the Queen as she watched her husband coordinate military operations with casual competence. Jake had pretended to need her protection while possessing capabilities that made such help meaningless. Their entire relationship had been built on lies that served human intelligence-gathering needs. Carter mentioned that human colonies, which had supposedly been destroyed by Keth Mori raids, had actually been evacuated in advance. The attacks had been allowed to proceed so that human intelligence could gather detailed information about enemy capabilities and tactics. Even the supposed victories that had boosted Kethmori confidence were part of human strategic planning. Jake noticed his wife's expression and tried to explain that his feelings for her were genuine, even if his identity had been false. He said that the marriage had begun as an intelligence operation, but had evolved into something real for him personally. The deception had been necessary for humanity's survival, but had created a relationship that both of them valued. Zarathiel was not ready to hear explanations or apologies, and she withdrew to her quarters to process what she had learned. Her empire was facing destruction by an enemy that had proven superior to Veltar military power. The only hope for survival lay with a species that had been systematically lying to the galaxy for decades. The approach of Kethmori forces registered. On human sensors and battle stations sounded throughout the fleet. Jake Morrison prepared to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of when threatened. His wife would witness the unveiling of military power that would redefine galactic politics and demonstrate why underestimating humans was a fatal mistake. The war that everyone expected humanity to lose was about to become a demonstration of why appearances could be deceiving in the most deadly possible way. The first engagement began at the outer edge of human space, where Kethmori scout swarms met Admiral Morrison's advanced screening force. Zarathiel watched from the command deck of the human flagship as her husband coordinated the battle with cold precision that reminded her why she had fallen in love with his intelligence. The Kethmori came in their usual overwhelming numbers, with thousands of small ships swarming toward human positions like angry insects. Their formation looked chaotic, but moved with perfect coordination as each unit responded to hive mind commands faster than individual pilots could react. Jake's fleet waited until the enemy was committed to their attack pattern before revealing their true capabilities. Human ships that had appeared lightly armed suddenly bristled with weapons that emerged from concealed housings. The escorts that looked like simple patrol vessels opened fire with energy beams that cut through Kethmori formations like blades through silk. The enemy's adaptive technology began analyzing human weapons and developing countermeasures, just as it had against Veltar forces. But the humans had anticipated this response, and their ships switched to completely different weapon types before the Kethmori could adapt. Beam weapons gave way to kinetic projectiles, which shifted to exotic energy types that the insectoids had never encountered. Zarathiel realized that human military doctrine was built around the enemy's primary advantage, instead of trying to maintain technological superiority. They had created systems that could change faster than any opponent could adapt. The Kethmori found themselves fighting an enemy that evolved during battle, just as they did, but with greater speed and flexibility. Admiral Carter coordinated the fleet movements with mathematical precision that made complex maneuvers look effortless. Human ships flowed around Kethmori formations like water-finding paths through stone. They concentrated overwhelming firepower at critical points, then dispersed before the enemy could respond effectively. The battle revealed layers of deception that went beyond simple technological concealment. Human ships used holographic projectors to create false targets that drew enemy fire, while real vessels attacked from unexpected angles. They employed electronic warfare systems that confused Kethmori coordination and turned their hive mind advantage against them. Jake explained to his wife that humanity had studied every major galactic conflict for decades and identified weaknesses in conventional military thinking. They had designed their forces specifically to counter the tactics that worked against traditional opponents. The Kethmori were facing an enemy that had been preparing for this exact fight since before they began their expansion. The insectoid forces tried to overwhelm human positions through sheer numbers, but found themselves herded into kill zones, where concentrated firepower destroyed entire formations. Their usual tactic of sacrificing forward elements to gather intelligence failed, because human weapons changed characteristics faster than the data could be processed and disseminated. Zarathiel watched Kethmori command ships trying to coordinate. Their swarms, while human electronic warfare specialists, fed them false information and contradictory orders. The perfect hive-mind coordination that made the insectoid so dangerous became a vulnerability when humans could manipulate the communication networks that held it together. The scale of human preparation became clear as the battle progressed, and revealed capabilities that no intelligence service had detected. Ships that should have been destroyed continued fighting with backup systems that exceeded the original specifications. damaged vessels reconfigured themselves into new roles and maintained combat effectiveness despite catastrophic damage. Admiral Morrison demonstrated personal combat leadership that impressed even Veltar military traditions by leading a boarding assault against a Kethamori command vessel. Zarathiel watched through sensor feeds as her husband fought alongside. Human Marines in close quarters combat that showcased their species' warrior potential. The human soldiers moved with coordination that matched Kethmori hive mind tactics while maintaining individual initiative that let them adapt to changing situations. They used weapons and armor that enhanced their natural abilities without making them dependent on technology that could be countered or disrupted. Jake's personal combat with the Kethmori ship commander revealed why humans had succeeded despite being relative newcomers to galactic warfare. He fought with intelligence and adaptability that turned the enemy's physical advantages against them. The insectoid warrior was stronger and faster, but Jake was smarter and more flexible. The battle for the command ship became a microcosm of the larger engagement as human forces systematically dismantled Kethmori advantages through superior tactics and preparation. Individual Marines outfought insectoid warriors by using terrain and teamwork, while their equipment gave them options that enemies could not predict or counter. Zarathiel found herself admiring human military capabilities while struggling with the personal betrayal of her husband's deception. The species she had patronized as primitive were revealing themselves as possibly the most sophisticated military power in the galaxy. Every assumption about human weakness was being proven false in the most dramatic way possible. The destruction of the Kethmori command vessel created chaos in the enemy formation as subsidiary units lost coordination and began attacking each other. Human forces exploited the confusion with precision strikes that eliminated key targets before the insectoids could restore their command structure. Admiral Carter reported that the engagement was proceeding according to tactical projections and that human losses were minimal compared to enemy casualties. The fleet was demonstrating capabilities that would reshape galactic military thinking once word of the battle spread to other civilizations. Jake returned from the boarding action with battle damage that showed he had earned his victory through personal risk rather than sending subordinates to fight for him. Zarathiel realized that her husband possessed warrior credentials that would be respected by any military culture in the galaxy. The final phase of the engagement showcased human strategic thinking as they prevented Kethmori survivors from escaping to report what they had learned. The entire enemy force was systematically destroyed to maintain operational security about human capabilities until the war was decided. News of additional battles reached the flagship as other human fleets engaged Kethmori forces throughout their expansion zone. Each engagement followed similar patterns as human forces revealed capabilities that turned expected defeats into overwhelming victories. The galaxy's newest military power was announcing itself through systematic destruction of an enemy that had terrified established civilizations. Zarathiel began to understand that humanity's concealment strategy had been far more sophisticated than simple technological deception. They had built entire false civilizations to hide their true nature while gathering intelligence about every potential threat in the galaxy. The helpless colonies and primitive technology had been props in a deception operation that spanned decades. The Queen realized that her empire's relationship with humanity would need to be completely renegotiated now that the truth was revealed. The species that had accepted Veltar protection were actually powerful enough to conquer most galactic civilizations. Every diplomatic arrangement would have to be reconsidered in light of humanity's actual capabilities. Jake approached his wife as the battle wound down and tried to explain his position during their months of deception. He admitted that maintaining the pretense had been personally difficult because he genuinely respected Zarathiel and wanted to be honest with her. The mission requirements had forced him to continue lying even as their relationship deepened. Zarathiel was not ready to forgive the betrayal, but she could see that Jake had struggled with the ethical implications of deceiving someone he cared about. The human military commander who had just demolished a Kethmori fleet was also the man who had shown her genuine affection during their marriage. The strategic implications of human military power were becoming clear as reports arrived from across the galaxy. Species that had dismissed humanity were scrambling to establish diplomatic relations with what they now recognized as a major power. The balance of galactic politics was shifting as everyone recalculated their positions relative to this new force. Admiral Morrison prepared for the next phase of operations against Kethmori main forces, while his wife processed the revelation that her entire worldview had been based on false information. The war that was supposed to demonstrate human weakness was instead revealing capabilities that would make them one of the most feared and respected civilizations in known space. The final assault on the Kethmori home systems began 3 weeks after humanity revealed its true military power to the galaxy. Admiral Morrison commanded a combined fleet that included Veltar ships, but everyone understood that human forces dominated the operation. Zarathiel had chosen to fight alongside her husband, despite the personal betrayal that still burned in her hearts. The approach to Kethmori space showcased the full extent of human military preparation as reinforcements arrived from hidden bases throughout the galaxy. Ships emerged from asteroid fields and nebulae where they had waited for years while maintaining perfect concealment. The species that everyone had dismissed as primitive revealed logistics networks that spanned dozens of star systems. Jake coordinated the multi-pronged assault with the casual competence that had first attracted Zarathiel to him during their courtship. She watched him balance political considerations about Veltar participation with tactical requirements for victory. He managed her people's wounded pride while ensuring that human capabilities remained the decisive factor in every engagement. Kethmori had gathered their remaining forces around their core worlds in formations designed to maximize their traditional advantages. Massive swarms of ships created defensive networks that should have been impenetrable to conventional attacks. Their hive-mind coordination had been refined to compensate for human electronic warfare techniques. Admiral Carter briefed the combined fleet about enemy dispositions and explained how human tactics would exploit weaknesses in Kethmori defensive thinking. The insectoids had prepared for the kind of siege warfare that characterized most galactic conflicts. Instead, they would face mobility and firepower that could penetrate any static defense. The human attack began with long-range bombardment that used exotic weapons to disrupt Kethmori communication networks without warning. Entire defensive formations lost coordination as their hive-mind links were severed by technologies that bypassed conventional shielding. Individual ships began operating independently without the collective intelligence that made them effective. Zarathiel observed the battle from Jake's flagship and saw her husband demonstrate why humans had become the galaxy's most feared military power in less than a month of revealed operations. He coordinated attacks across multiple star systems while maintaining tactical flexibility that kept enemy commanders guessing about his next move. The breakthrough came when human forces penetrated the outer defensive shell and began systematic elimination of Kethmori command structures. Ships that had been hidden inside combat formations revealed themselves as specialized weapons platforms designed specifically for this type of warfare. The insects found themselves facing an enemy that had prepared for years to fight exactly this battle. Admiral Morrison led the assault on the primary hive world while his wife watched from the tactical display. The planet's surface was covered with structures that housed billions of Kethmori warriors in perfect organizational harmony. Breaking their resistance would require ground combat that tested human capabilities against overwhelming numbers. The landing operation showcased human military doctrine that emphasized quality over quantity while maintaining enough flexibility to handle unexpected situations. Dropships delivered marine units that moved with precision through enemy positions, while